You see my name here, Paul Kirschner. I am a professor at the Open University, and until the end of this month, or next month, I'm a visiting professor at the WOC by the eLearnCenter. I am an educational psychologist. I am head of the International Society of the Learning Sciences. I am on the Minister's Scientific Technical Council for the use of ICT in higher education in the Netherlands. But on top of that, within CELSTEC, and that is the Center for Learning Sciences and Technologies, if I was to explain to you how that works, I would say to you, we have 3 columns, and those are content-related columns. One column is learning and cognition. I am the director of learning and cognition. So that means all of the research, all of the laboratory activities, all of the valorization activities that I do are related to learning and cognition. And I could tell anyone who wants, you can go to our website and see, you can read it in this, what learning and cognition means, what exactly it is that we do research on, but that's the content area that I'm involved with. I have 2 colleagues, one is involved in learning networks and one is involved in learning media. Those are our 3 content columns. We also have structural areas. One structural area, which I am the director of, is the director of research. That means it is my job to make sure that research goes well. That means everything from how does the research proposal look like and how does it have to be approved, the research proposal, before you can carry out the research, to what type of courses or what type of support do we give to PhD candidates in getting their PhD, what are the type of journals that you publish in if you're doing research. So I am the structural chair of research. Anything research related is me. The head of CELSTEC, Rob Koper, if it deals with research, he says, we got this proposal and they have this and this person doing the review of it. Do you think we can use this review because in our opinion the reviewers didn't have the level that research proposals should have? Another one of my colleagues is dealing with the valorization. That's Peter Sloop. His structural area is how do we bring that which we have learned and know to the general population, either for money or for free, but how do we share our knowledge with the general public? And we call that valorization activities. Okay? And that's Peter Sloop. He helps me valorize my content area of research on learning and cognition, but his job is what are our public relations, what type of courses do we give, how do we communicate to the general public. His area is learning networks. That's his content area that he does research in. And when he does research in that and he has a research problem, he comes to me because I am the structural head of research. And finally, we have Marcus Specht, and he is more technology person. He's in the area of learning media. His specialization is social media and mobile media. We also have immersive media. That's his area of expertise as content, but he takes care of what we call labs, proofs of concept. So if I need for my learning and cognition specific tools for carrying out research, experience sampling method, eye tracking, those types of things, I go to Marcus because his structural area is labs. Okay? So you're speaking to a person whose content area is learning and cognition, and whose structural area is the doing of research, which a PhD candidate should do. Okay? That's the general picture of what I can give answers. This is a PhD. It's the highest degree you can get. You can put the name DR in front of your name with this. But what's most important is in the first paragraph that it takes 4 years of research to do it, to get it. So it's not like the American system that you do a half a year of research. You write a thesis that's 250 pages long. You don't publish anything and you're called doctor. It is 4 years of research, usually 3 or 4 research projects published in 4 journals that at the end you make a thesis from. There are no courses, so not like the American or whatever, in which you have a year of courses and then a half year of research and a half year of writing your thesis. All of the courses that you do, there are courses within it, they're more what we call a master class, bringing you in specifically with respect to what you're doing your research on. You might be doing research in collaborative learning, and you need a special master class in multi-level analysis and protocol analysis. Okay? But that's different from a course in statistics, or a course in this, or a course in that. So all of the courses you get are for your professionalization, and not really content areas. And in the final area is the final that you defend a thesis based upon original scientific research supervised by a recognized PhD supervisor who is a full professor. In Belgium, an associate or an assistant professor can be your PhD supervisor. In Germany, a professor who has done his habilitation, but who is not a full professor yet at the university, can be a PhD supervisor. In Spain, I just learned that Teresa is a supervisor here, but in the Netherlands would not be a supervisor because that person is not a full professor. What it's like to get your PhD in the Netherlands. What is the setup? What are the goals? What are the rules? What is the process? How does it work? How do we support it as professors? How do the PhD candidates, you will never hear me use the word PhD students, because in the Netherlands we don't have PhD students. We have PhD candidates. I'll go into all of that. If you want to ask any questions, you ask it. I can, from how many hours to how much are they paid, to how many hours a week, to what journals do you publish in, anything you want to know, I will answer. And any questions that you might have and that might come to you after the presentation, you can email me. I call it an alternative approach, not because it's alternative in the Netherlands, but it's very different from what you normally see in Spain, in France, and in the United States, where you might use as a model for getting your PhD. What is the basis for a PhD? It's very simple. It has to be independent research. It is supervised and guided by experts. I'll go into who the experts are. But it is independent research. It's based upon theory. And what do I mean by that? Because everybody says, of course it's based upon theory. Most American PhD research is what I call Nike just do it theory. Did it work? In my field, the most important part of a research proposal is the theoretical framework behind it. The idea behind writing a PhD thesis is not to see if something works, but to advance the theory further. It can be qualitative, it can be quantitative, it can be design-based. But real design-based research says, we start with a theory. Based upon the theory, we think of an intervention. We carry out the intervention and study it. And based upon the results of our intervention, we adapt our theory. And based upon this adapted theory, we then make a new intervention. That's not iterative design. Most of the Americans I know who call and do design-based research are busy with iterative design. We design something, we test it, we see if it works, we tweak our design, we test it, we see if it works, we tweak our design, we test it, it works, we get our PhD on it. And that has nothing to do with the theory. That is a procedure for iterative design. Design-based research and the Design-Based Research Collective and Anne Brown and all of these people, Carnegie Mellon, who are doing it, say design-based research starts with the theory, and all of the things you do are designed to advance and better the theory. So it's always based upon a theory, and you do a series of experiments based upon a theory or a theoretical background. And hopefully your final chapter of your thesis tells me how the theory has been changed and gotten better. I don't, even if something doesn't work, it's important, because it tells me under this situation it won't work. I want to know, the reason it's based upon theory, and then I answer your question, sorry. The reason it's based upon theory is very simple. I need to know whether or not there's a probability, and what the probability is, that if I try something based upon this theory in a different situation, what will be the probability that it will or won't work there? So it's not important for me to know that it works. It's important for me to know why it works, how it works. It's not important for me to know that it doesn't work. It's important for me to know why it doesn't work and what the aspects of the situation were that made it not work. Because if I want to do it again, I want to remove those failure factors. I want to know that it worked because people had a certain level of knowledge and had a certain, could think in a certain abstract way. So I know that if I try it with 7-year-olds, it won't work. And that's the problem with most research. They try it in a university population and then they use it, and that's where they write their thesis, and they use it by 7-year-olds, and they find it strange that these 7-year-olds can't work with inquiry-based learning. Yeah, heck no. They cannot even think abstractly. How are they going to discern what the abstract theory is behind what they're doing? Your question.
Yeah, what if you don't have a relevant theory to start with? But
then you design your own theory.
But you have an interesting problem, and maybe you don't have an expert, not even a full professor who is expert, but he's interested.
You go and find the full expert. Even if it's not in your country, you go to another country.
But what about the emerging topics that...
There will always be an emerging topic emerges because probably a certain theory wasn't good, didn't work, so you develop your own theory. I mean, this very cognitive flexibility theory, that was something that Rand Spiro, that didn't exist, based upon his idea. And I'm not saying I'm for or against, that doesn't matter. Based upon his idea that people will learn and understand better in a rich context, he came up with his cognitive flexibility theory, and then you carry out research to see whether or not those aspects of your cognitive flexibility theory, whether they are valid or not. And eventually you become a professor, and you have a whole group of PhD researchers and staff members who are only doing research on cognitive flexibility to bring it further. There is no topic that we know of.
Another question that I have is, what happens with multidisciplinary research where you don't really have a single expert?
You use more. It's very, very simple. As I said, if I'm dealing with specific aspects of a mobile technology in learning, I will probably do it with a technologist. if I'm dealing with the socio-cultural aspects of using problem-based learning in China, knowing that problem-based learning is based upon a Socratic philosophical method, and China is a Confucian society, I will probably have an anthropologist as other professor. I will have one professor of educational science and one professor of anthropology, and we will take it as a multi or an inter or a transdisciplinary topic. You can have in the Netherlands 2 or 3 PhD promoters, and that's why I said for the Dutch people here dealing with industrial design, I would possibly, if I'm dealing with what type of tables do you need in a classroom to make collaborative learning, face-to-face work, I will probably have a professor of design along with myself, because my specialty is collaborative learning and argumentation, and theirs is design, and together we make an interactive table for collaboration. Pierre Dillenburg does that research in Switzerland. Pierre is a computer scientist working in the field of education, and he makes use of designers to design his interactive tables for collaborative learning. There's no problem in that respect that can't be solved. We build on the shoulders of others, so even a new emerging will make use of old other theories that need to be changed, and things in trans and multidisciplinary fields, you get a second or a third promoter. Simple. So that idea, it's a unique in addition, I mean, that's, if it's emerging, if it should be, but it can't be a replication of what someone else has done. You don't get your PhD for that. What types of PhD candidates and trajectories do we have? The most normal is the full-time researcher in training. That is someone who is a beginning academic, who has his or her master's degree in a certain field, who comes to my institute or any other institute and is paid to do research for 4 years. Depending upon the research grant or the university that paid for full-time work on research, can also mean 4 years of working 4 days a week on your research, and anywhere from 1 day to less than 1 day doing something else which is important for your academic career. For example, at the University of Utrecht, where I used to work, you worked 90% of your time on research and 10% of your time on teaching, because being a full-time academic means you have to do research and teach. So we thought it was good for our PhD candidates to do both of those things. And so we did that, and the research budget paid 90% of someone's salary, and the education budget paid 10% of their salary. At the Open University, where I work now, and have always worked, we do it 80-20, 80%, 20%. 80% of your time you're doing research, 20% of the time you're doing something else, and that something else is usually being a tutor in our department, in our Masters of Learning Sciences. So that means you make use of your knowledge in the learning sciences by being a tutor or a teacher within the learning sciences, and at the same time, at the end of that 4-year trajectory, you have a diploma called our basic qualification in education, which means when you get your PhD, you have a diploma saying you are a doctor in a certain area, and you have this certificate saying you are an accomplished teacher. You have done all of those things in teaching that you should have done. You have designed the course, you have tutored the course, you have examined the course, you've done all of those types of things with success. You've learned to tutor an online course, because we have special courses in how you tutor online courses, so that when you apply for a job somewhere else at another university, you're not only a doctor in educational sciences, but you also have a basic qualification in tutoring and teaching, which means you're better equipped to carry out your job later on a university as an academic. Because most academics, the law in the Netherlands says, if you are an academic on a university, so you're not a researcher, you're not a teacher, you are an academic, means that you have a certain amount of your time is for teaching, a certain amount of your time is for doing research, and a certain amount of your time is for overhead. Next to that, you might be a researcher at a university. You are 100% paid for seeing whether new mesons that collide in CERN with something else do something, or you are a full-time teacher and do no research. But for the rest, all other academics, and that's 90% of all academics, 80% of all academics at university, have a research and a teaching responsibility. The second type is staff member. Those are often people who came into the university as a teacher and want to be a full academic, because your career as a teacher stops at a certain point. You cannot receive certain levels in the university if you stay a teacher. And they say, I want to become an academic, and then they see how they can finance. Sometimes your department wants you to be that, and they finance it. Sometimes your department says, we don't have the money, so you have to find funding somewhere else for that. For working at least 2 days a week in the boss's time on getting your PhD. That means 4 or 5 years working 2 days a week in the boss's time, and usually 1 day a week in your own time to get your PhD. So you're working as a staff member. I don't know if it's here the case, but let's say within here some of you only have a teaching function. It would be, how can I find funding, or how can I get my boss at the law department to pay for 2 days a week of my doing research, so that at the end of a period of 4 or 5 years, I am a doctor, I receive my doctorate's title. Okay? So that's staff. And the third is external. That could be you are working either as alone or at a polytechnic or at a high school or whatever, and you say, okay, I am a biologist, but I want to get a degree which deals with the pedagogy or the didactics of using collaborative learning in teaching biology, so I want to get a PhD. How can I get my head of my school, or you're in human resources management at a large company, and you want to get further in your company, and to get further in your company, you need, and your boss at your company says, you should get your PhD in human resources, the role of education in human resources in the field of Lord knows what. And then you come to me, or you come to, when I say me, I mean, I'm talking, you come to a professor at a university, and you say, I want to get my PhD in this and this, and along with that professor, you write a research proposal which is equivalent to any research proposal that is written. It's not of a lower level. Getting your PhD has to have the same quality criteria as any other PhD. It's not lower, it's not different. It's only the relationship is different. And then at the end, when you've written your proposal and it's approved, and I'll explain to you how that happens, yeah? That approval process, that means you also have to write your articles, defend your thesis. The whole bit is exactly the same. We don't say it's a lower quality, it's different. It has to, if it doesn't meet those quality criteria, you don't get your PhD. As a matter of fact, if you go to my website at my university, we have a portal. I can give you later, I don't have it on the slide, I can give it to you, I can show it to you, as a matter of fact. We have a portal in English for external PhD candidates. They can come to me, they can do a self-test. Do I have what is needed to be a PhD candidate? And then they can get in touch with me and they can go into this trajectory. And it doesn't matter if that person is in Abu Dhabi or in Barcelona or in the United States or in South Africa or in the Polytechnic, which is on the other side of the road from where my university is. That doesn't matter at all.
Do you ask external any proof that they really have 2 days with their job?
Yes, that's the answer to that is yes. They have to sign a contract at the moment, and I'll explain it to you. At the moment, I call it a two-step procedure. The first step is kind of like an engagement. The second is the marriage. In the engagement period, we spend 6 months with each other, me giving a minimum of extra help, and in those 6-month period, that external candidate has to write a PhD proposal that meets all of the criteria that it should meet, and it's a minimum of time on my part, because I want to see, does this person have the academic level necessary to write a PhD thesis proposal? In that period, it's minimum, because that person who's writing the proposal has to see, do I have the level that's necessary to write a PhD proposal? Because the level needed to write the PhD proposal is the level you need to carry out your research. You have to be able to think in an academic way. The reason we have 6 months, 6 to 8 months to do this, that's the engagement period, is because if it takes you 2 years to do this, it will take you 12 years to get your PhD. And I don't want to start on this, and you shouldn't start out. Okay? So that's the engagement. It's also called an engagement because you're married to each other after that for at least 4 years. In an academic way, not in a sexual way.
And if it doesn't work, you say bye-bye.
Oh yeah, yeah. So at the end of this, at the end of this 6 months, at the end of this 6 months, you know. Let's say you are the external. You know, can I work with Paul Kirschner? Do I have myself the academic niveau? Do I appreciate the type of comments he gives and the way? Can I meet his expectations? Do I want to meet his expectations, or do I find him a complete asshole? It could be. There's I know. That's why I said asshole and not something else. Because that's important. I mean, it could be you can't deal with the type of commentary that I give you. And that's great if you can. Don't start your PhD with me. For myself, it's the same thing. Do I see this person who's doing it, that it takes me 7 explanations before he or she understands it? I don't want to begin with this idiot, in my opinion. I will never say it to this person, but I don't want to start. At that point in time, after 6 or 8 months, we say to each other, the level of the proposal I think is good. We think we can work with each other. At that point in time, I send that proposal to 2 full professors somewhere else. And I say to them, these are the criteria. These are the criteria that our National Science Foundation sets for a PhD proposal. These have been adopted by my own department from the NSF. Do you think this, if you were asked to fund this proposal, do you think it's fundable, fundable with changes, or not fundable? Those are the only 3 answers you can give me, and why? With respect to the theory, with respect to the research questions, with respect to the methodology, with respect to the feasibility. Feasibility means, does this someone want to do too much in too little time? And if the answer to that is A, fundable, or at least 1A and a maximum of 1B, fundable if changed in this way, that person is accepted by me, by my university, as a PhD candidate. At that point in time, we sign a contract between my university and the person, what they expect of me and what I expect of them. They can expect so many hours a week of my time. They can expect to follow this and this course. They have availability to this and this scientific library online. I expect them to do this and this. I expect to come to my area, to be in touch with me at least once every 2 weeks. I expect them to finish this in this amount of time. Okay? And if they have an employer that the employer signs, I give them 2 hours a week of their time, 2 days a week of their time. I will pay 1,000 euros a year for them to have use of the library and this and this. And only when this bilateral or trilateral contract is signed, we are married. That's our marriage contract. And that marriage contract also says how long we are married. And that says you will do this within 4 years. And this marriage contract is dissolved at the moment that that person has successfully defended his or her PhD. And at that point in time, the marriage contract is dissolved. And we are hopefully dissolved in a friendly way. It's kind of like some people who get a divorce and say, okay, we've been together, it's been a nice period, we've both profited from it, but we see we have to go on. This is a nice period, we've both profited from it, I've gotten my PhD, you've gotten the articles that are good for you, all of those types of things, and now we go our own way. I, as an academic that I always was, and this person as now a full-fledged researcher who is capable of doing research, and hopefully we will have contact with each other, we will publish with each other, we will maybe work together to get funding somewhere else, but we are no longer in this marriage relationship of supervisor-candidate. We are now equals on an academic level. We are both doctor. I have 30 more years of experience, but we are both doctor. Constraints, you have to have a master's diploma to start on it. You have to think about, it takes 4 years and it takes about 4 days a week. For externals, we say 3 days a week, 2 plus 1, 2 in the boss's time, 1 in your own time minimally. Often, the reason for that is very, very simple. Those people are usually older and have experience, so they get it a little bit more quickly, let's put it that way. And the other, they often are doing a piece of research that has something to do with the normal work relationship situation, which means they already have a school that they can carry out their intervention and do their things and know about the pedagogy of biology or whatever. So all of those things that a 22-year-old coming directly from the university doesn't know and has to invest his or her research time in doing, kind of like finding people with pedagogical content knowledge so that they can do their research in the field of biology because they're actually psychologists and they know nothing about genetics and heredity and things like that. So all of those extra things, I don't expect the biology teacher to have any problem, and also to find co-workers who will then validate whether or not the tools that they're using are actually good tools and stuff. So I think someone who's experienced might be able to do it in 3 days a week. But that for a PhD coming directly from university, we think 4 days a week is the minimum. That person has to have an academic level of thinking and writing, because you get your PhD based upon published articles, published in SSCI, ISI journals, published in English. Yeah? It's just that simple, which means you write your thesis in English. We have nothing on theses that are written in Dutch. I just had someone, she was dealing with special education, those are children with learning disabilities, and she said, I would really love to do this, but my field of endeavor is primarily Dutch, and I don't think I can write very well in English. That would be a problem. I said to her, number one, your field is not Dutch because there's special education everywhere. Here's an article by someone dealing with kindergarten education in the Netherlands. how Dutch can you get, but published in Learning and Instruction, because it's on something with learning, on something in instruction. It doesn't matter that it's with Dutch kindergarten children. And this person, I mean, I can't look into your head and see whether or not you can publish and write in English, and how much of a problem. But we have nothing on theses in Dutch, because education, educational sciences, technology-enhanced learning is an international field. The theories are international. And I have nothing on something that my colleagues in the United States or in Australia or in France or in Germany cannot read. It's that simple. You are allowed to publish, from me, there is one SSCI journal, SCCI journal. It's got its SSCI ranking 1 year ago, and that's a Dutch language. So in principle, you could write 4 articles in an SSCI journal in Dutch, but since there's only one journal, the chance is very limited. All of your publications are okay publications, they're SSCI, although the SSCI ranking will be very low, because no one anywhere else in the world will refer to an article in that journal, because they can't read Dutch. Very, very simple. So it'll have a very, very low SSCI ranking. And I will still require that person to translate all of those 4 articles into English, because I refuse to be a promoter of a Dutch language PhD thesis. I don't say that there might not be another professor of education or educational psychology in the Netherlands who is willing to be the promoter of a PhD thesis in Dutch, but I will not do that. For very principled reasons. It is an international field, and I feel that if you're doing research that adds something to the theory, I have doodly squat on a thesis that's written in a language that others cannot read. I have doodly squat on articles that are written in a language that no one else can read. And my field of learning sciences has nothing doodly squat on a.
We ask the student, the candidate that begins the PhD to have a published article in English now?
No, but I do by a PhD student. Now you're asking to me, how do I evaluate that? It's very simple. The PhD proposal from an external candidate or an internal staff has to be in English. The proof of the pudding is in the eating. If it's an external, if it's a PhD in that first category, full-time, who's hired by me, I will carry out the first meeting with 8 candidates, because we actually publish the vacancy in academic transfer or in the newspaper. So anyone in the world can apply for it, okay? The first meeting, in which we go from 8 down to 2 or 3 candidates for a second meeting, will be in English or in Dutch, depending upon if the person comes from the Netherlands or another country. If the person comes from another country and has to do that research in a Dutch school, they will have to learn Dutch, but you can't deal with teachers and students if you can't speak Dutch. If they come from Dutch, we'll carry it out in Dutch. Then, based upon the research proposal that's already been written, because otherwise I don't get funding unless the research proposal is written, I will say to the 2 or 3 candidates that are left, it's a very fun procedure. I will say to them, at the end of the first meeting, you'll hear from me within a day or within a couple of days whether or not you're invited for a second meeting. At that point in time, the date of the second meeting will be chosen. 72 hours before that second meeting, you will receive a task from me. The task will be in English, and your reply will be in English. 72 hours before the meeting. Within 48 hours, I expect you to send me a maximum of 2 pages, plus 1 page of references, your solution to that task. That gives me exactly 24 hours to read it and understand it. The second meeting, the discussion of the second meeting, will be based upon how you answered that task. And it will be in English. So you can let your brother, who's a professor in psychology, do that task. I don't really care about that. But I don't think you'll be able to discuss it with me on that Friday. You can use any source materials you want. Go on the web, use Google Scholar, use your textbooks, go to EBSCO, that's for academic, go to EBSCO. Doesn't really matter to me. Because that's, for me, proof if you can find good literature, it's great. And what the thing usually is let's say, reading this proposal, that the first experiment doesn't turn out this way, but turns out that way. What will your second experiment look like and why? Write that in 2 pages, APA, with 1 page of references, redesign the second experiment, planned experiment. Or, what do you think is wrong with this proposal? Why? And redesign it so that it's better. I can then see someone's level of academic thinking and how they write in English. Very simple. I have colleagues who do it differently. They bring someone for half a day to the university. They put them in a room with a computer. They give them a task and say, you have 2 hours to carry out the task in English. Then go eat lunch for an hour, and then we will meet. Because they want them to really think on their feet. That's another way of doing it. I don't do it that way. I want to see if someone is capable of getting the articles, looking, knowing where to look, think about it, and redesign. I want somebody's level of academic thinking. And I think I need to give them 2 days to do that. But that's the way we do it. Very simple. Also for a PhD candidate just coming from the university.
So what is the approximate ratio of approved PhD candidates that there are in your context, or maybe in your case?
It depends upon, the last one we had 26 candidates for a piece of research and 1 was chosen. And we went with, from the 26, 6 were chosen for the first round, 3 went through to the second round, and 1 was chosen. So that's 4%. From another, it might be 8 candidates who solicited for the position, and 1 of 8 is chosen for the finally, and 2 go through to the second round. So it's 8 to 1. It depends upon, do you get good candidates, do you get bad candidates? Is it a sexy topic, or is it a specialistic topic? The last one dealt with neuroscience, to tell you something, cognitive neuroscience, and we had 26 people, and 1 got the PhD proposed position. For testing and assessment, we had 5, and 2 will be invited to do it, and hopefully 1 of them will end up being good. Sometimes it's none, and I advertise. Yeah, I open it again. I will not take second best.
So the topic is set up ahead of time.
Yeah.
It is not that.
Well, no. For an external, it's not. For an external, it's often what someone thinks is important. For example, one of the people who decided not to do it in this special education was the effects of certain nutrients, what they eat, on the cognitive functioning of attention deficit children. Now, that's not something I would think of beforehand. That's something that's important. I happen to have an associate professor who's an expert in the biophysiological aspects of learning and cognition, has done research on, omega-3 and omega-6 fats and cognitive fitness, and could be very good the daily supervisor of this person. And I could be the full professor doing it from the learning side of the coin. But that's nothing I would write beforehand. So if I want funding from our NSF, I write it beforehand. I have to get it approved. They give me money to do it. If I want to have it paid for by my university, they first have to say, we have the money to pay for someone for 4 years. That's approximately 200,000 euros for 4 years. Paul, you write a proposal. And I usually don't write it myself. I will give it to one of my seniors, one of my associate professors, because they will be the daily supervisor. They write the proposal, but even though it's an internally funded PhD, I will then send it to 3 professors, one within the Open University, that's the head of the psychology department, René van Heesewijk, and 2 externals, one at the University of Leuven, that's at this moment Jan Elen, and one at the University of Ulm, and that's the name escapes me at the moment. It's not Susan Narcisse, it's whatever. 2 externals, and they have to rate it as an A, a B, or a C. If it's someone from the Polytechnic of Barcelona or some high school in Barcelona, then I go to 2 external experts and do it in the same way. But then they write it themselves. What are the steps? We've gone through a number of those things. Well, first it's a proposal, and I've explained to you how the proposal is done. Then there's research, carrying out the research. Publication in ISI, SSCI journals. That means it's kind of like an overlapping thing. You do a piece of theoretical work reading, and you create a deep cognitive theoretical framework, and you carry out a pilot on a piece of research and get some data on that so that you can publish that. While you're working on the publishing of that, you see what the results of your pilot are, and you're working on and designing and setting out your first piece of real empirical research, so that by the time you're carrying out your first piece of empirical research, your first paper has been presented at one conference and has been submitted to a journal, so that you can begin data collection for the first real experiment. Once you get that data in and have done the analysis, you start planning your second piece of empirical research. You present your first piece of empirical research and you write up that for publication. So by the time you carry out your second piece of empirical research, you're submitting so it overlaps in that way, so that at the end of that publication cycle, you write your thesis. That thesis usually contains 1 or 2 published articles, 1 accepted article, and 1 submitted article. Let's put it that way. It can run the variation. I've known people who have had 4 accepted articles or 5. That's the exception. I know some who only have 1 accepted article and 3 submitted articles. That's also the exception. Okay? But usually we go like that. Then it goes to a thesis evaluation committee. The thesis evaluation committee at my university, let's say, I'll give you an average, yeah, contains, can I give them further?
Maybe is there a thesis document?
Yes.
Or is
yes. You write your thesis. I'll explain to you what the thesis looks like in a second. I think it's on the next slide. Okay. Otherwise, there's a thesis document. That thesis document goes to a thesis committee. The thesis committee contains anywhere between 4 and 6 or 7 people. The University of Utrecht says it's a maximum of 5. For example, some have maximum, it's usually no more than 6. Of those 5 at the University of Utrecht, 4 have to be full professors. At the Open University of the Netherlands, 3 have to be full professors. Okay? 2 can be associate professors. Because it could be, for what reason or ever, that you want 1 or 2. I mean, let's, for example, Elena is not a full professor, so she wouldn't be categorized as that. But the piece of research we're doing deals with time and time factor. Now, she's an expert on that. So, I would include Elena in my committee because her specific field of expertise, there is no professor that I can find in that. I need her expertise in the committee. That's simple. Okay? But at least 3 of those 5 have to be a full professor. They only get a vote yes or no. Yes means it can be defended in public. No, it cannot be defended in public. Some universities say it has to be unanimous. Some people say there can only be 1 no vote. Some say there has to be a majority of yes. That is on the university itself to determine. Some universities say, I only want 1 piece of paper, and that piece of paper can say yes or no. Other ones say, I'd also like you to fill in this form. What do you think of the methodology? What do you think of this? What do you think of that? It is not required. After getting this yes or no, the thesis cannot be changed. I'm going a little far. It can be changed if you notice that you made a typographical error, that n is 46 actually should be n is 47. It can be changed if you left out half a sentence because you copied and pasted. Any structural changes in the document means that there is a new thesis. I have to resubmit that whole new thesis to the same group of people and ask them to reevaluate that thesis, yes or no, based upon this new thesis. They can choose to only read chapter 3, in which a part of the theory is changed, but according to the law, they gave a yes or a no based upon a document that I gave them. That document is a photocopied, bound with ring band or whatever, example of exactly what the thesis will look like when it's in a book. That means they've given their yes answer to this document and not to an amended document. And that means if I want to have them defend an amended document, they have to re-evaluate because it's not the same document. They are not asking questions at the public defense because that commission is the same group of people that will be opposing the public defense. They will have to oppose that document that they've approved or disapproved. And if I give them, if they've said document A is okay, I let someone amend it, and then I ask them to oppose it at a defense, they're not opposing the same document that they've read. It's that simple. It sounds very intricate, but it's that simple. It's kind of like if it's a football team, the official, the referee, says, okay, these are the 11 people playing, gets that paper signed by the coach, and all of a sudden someone else is in that. He says, in that paper you handed me, these were the 11 people. If you want to amend it, that's great, but you give me an amended thing, and because it's now so late, that means you've used your first change. It's a very simple, normal thing. Who are the players and what are their roles in this? The PhD supervisor or supervisors. That's a full professor. Nominally, we say that that person is busy 1 hour a week with a PhD candidate. It's never 1 hour a week. But you have to choose something. And if I gave them the right amount, I would never get to do anything else. Okay? That's simple. But nominally, that's 1 hour a week. You have a daily supervisor. That is nominally 2 hours a week. Now, what does that 1 and 2 hour a week mean? For me, and not every, I don't know if I'm average or not, I don't know if I'm better or worse. For me, being a supervisor means my door is always open, and I have a structured meeting with you planned 1 year ahead of time, every 3 weeks. It's that simple. I meet with you as PhD, and I meet with your supervisor there also once every 3 weeks for 1 to 2 hours. That meeting is always based upon a document. That document can be a mind map. That document can be a questionnaire that someone's using. That document can be a concept article. And anything in between it. The daily supervisor is the person who is on a daily basis, that's the person that the PhD candidate has to go to first if he or she has a problem. And that daily supervisor is always ready to answer and help. That daily supervisor has a structured meeting once a week with the PhD candidate for an hour. It can be that in certain weeks it doesn't happen. If that person is busy for 3 weeks gathering data at 27 different schools in the Netherlands, I don't expect a meeting once every week. I'm talking to you now about general, on average. That's what the person has a right. It is the PhD candidate's right. It is the PhD supervisor's duty to do that. That PhD supervisor has also anything and everything to say about vacations, money spent, buying of apparatus. In the proposal, it says that this person has so much money for this and this. I don't want to know where the money goes. I don't give a darn about it. So if a PhD candidate comes to me and says, I need to buy this and this, can it? I say, go back to that person. I know nothing about money. I don't want to know nothing about money. That's the daily supervisor's job. That person would assure that you don't go through your budget. You want to go to this conference, it's in your budget, great. Does your daily supervisor find that it's okay? Yes. I will sign to our director of operations, this person can go. That's my job, I'm the boss. But your daily supervisor is the person who says if you can go or not. Are you far enough? Do you have the data to do that? I don't want to know about that. I have enough problems. Okay? Then we have the PhD candidate, and we have others. Who are the others? The others are not the professor at another university that is also one of the promoters, the PhD supervisor. The others are programmers, testing experts and assessment experts, data analysts, all of those types of things. That's all in your proposal that you need these people, student assistants. But those are the others who help you.
A question, when you meet your candidate as a full professor, does the daily supervisor go to the meeting also?
Of course.
Okay.
Because that person has done something. Yeah, that is the moment that they check whether what they have done and talked about in the previous 3 weeks are okay with me. Usually I know about it because I get all of the emails beforehand and I've read it, and they ask also for commentaries and feedback from me. But that's our official moment because I want to know if they say, well, I did this because Saskia said I should do it. What the hell does that mean if Saskia is not in the same room? So Saskia says, we did that because we thought that this and this was the case. That doesn't mean I don't have meetings with PhD candidates without the supervisor. Because as I said, my door is always open. They can come in, they can say, I'd like to have a brainstorm session with you, Paul. Let's sit in front of the whiteboard in room 132, and I'd like to talk to you about my ideas and think about it. And Saskia isn't there at that moment. I would ask, should Saskia be? No, I've talked to Saskia a number of times. I want to hear what you think about it. And we'll sit there for an hour or 2 hours or half a day. So it's not that every time I talk to you, your daily supervisor has to be there, but you have a right and I have a duty to have a meeting once every 3 weeks with you and your supervisor together, so that nobody can hide behind anything. I can't hide, the supervisor can't hide, you can't hide. 4 years isn't so long. I believe in very intensive contact with my PhD candidates. Yeah? What are the parts of a proposal? Okay. Yeah. Now there's a title. I can show you, I mean, I can send it to you, our proposal, that's absolutely no problem. There's a problem definition. I want to know in 250 words why that which you're studying, going to study, is a problem. Not because it's interesting, or because I find it, what's the problem? And what is your PhD research going to solve? I want to know your scientific research framework. What theories are related to what you're doing? I mean, I spoke to you this morning, and that was what I was talking about. What theories are related to it? Theories of self-efficacy, theories of tool appropriation. If we're talking about, we were talking about why teachers don't use tools, certain ICTs. Now, you can say, well, it could be theory about someone's self-confidence, self-efficacy. So look into Bandura. It could be theories of tool appropriation. There are a lot of theories of how tools are appropriated. Look into that. It could deal with that there are certain pedagogical goals that you want to achieve that a certain tool can't achieve. I want to know then what pedagogical or educational theories are lying behind why a tool should be used. That's all in your scientific framework. I want to know the design and methodology. I want to know beforehand, going from very detailed to not very detailed, what are the 4 experiments that you're going to carry out in the next 4 years? Yeah? The first one is very well worked out. That's your first experiment. The second experiment, I want to know, let's say that you're right. Chances not very large, but let's say you're right and your first experiment ends with exactly what you expected. What would be your second experiment? And leaving room in that second experiment for, if it goes a different way, how are we going to tweak your second experiment? So you could say, first experiment is very detailed, 100% detailed, almost, let's call it 90%. The second one is 70% detailed. Your third one is 50 to 40% detailed. And your last one says, based upon the results of the first 3, we're going to do this and this in an educational setting in the high school, making use of the best conditions out of the first 3 pieces of research. It could also be the case that you choose, I think that this is important, I think that that's important. So the first experiment will be a 2x2 experimental design, in which factorial design, in which you look at this, and your second experiment will you'll look at something else. And your third experiment will be the best of experiment 1 and the best of experiment 2. So you'll combine it, because you don't want to, in your first experiment, have a 2x2x2x2 experiment, factorial design, because you have 16 conditions, and you need then 320 respondents, and you'll never get that. So you choose to do it in steps. That's a very valid reason. Just explain to me why. Your methodology you choose, there's no one methodology. It could be, did you want to do a mixed methodology in which you have qualitative and quantitative? It could be that you want an ethnological. I don't really care. Explain to me why, to solve your problem and answer your question, you need this research methodology and these experiments. Let's call them experiments. Studies. Experiment sounds like it's in a lab 2x2 experiment. They're studies. I call them experiments, but we're talking about studies. What's the importance of it? Why are you doing this? And that's what the problem. What's the importance? How will it make education better? How will it make walk education better? How will it make tutors do their job? How will it advance the theory? So what's the importance? What's the originality? Why is it different from another piece of research? Why isn't it a replication? Explain to me, in one paragraph, I'm not talking about a book, one paragraph, how is this original? What is different in what you're doing from the 720 other pieces of research that I know have been carried out? Okay? Feasibility. Why do you think, what's in it, write it in a way that it's feasible? I mean, anything is feasible with a big enough budget. I mean, we can get to the moon with enough budget. But that type of budget I don't have. Okay? So, if you're doing this, design it in a way that it can be carried out in 4 years with the resources that I can give you to do that. Staff and material budget. That relates to feasibility. Who do you need? What do you need? How much do you need? Because above me, there's someone who does the finances and says if it can be done or not. Relevance and importance. And that's a little bit different from the first importance. What's the scientific, strategic, practical, and societal importance? What does society have on this, with this? Yeah, so those are the things that you think about. I'm not saying they're all in a separate part of your proposal, but I have to be able to read this in your proposal. And that means every proposal, from an associate professor down to a teacher working in a school somewhere, and everything in between. I have to be able to see that in a proposal. And finally, the ethical considerations, of course. What are the parts of a thesis? Very simple. If I was going to give you a standard thesis, it begins with a title page, or those types of things, then an introduction. Why this research? That's 6 pages long. Why this research? And what are the parts? Well, in chapter 1 I give you this. We'll call this the chapter 0, the introduction. In chapter 1 I give you the theory. In chapter 2 I give you the results of our first experiment, which was carried out there. Chapter 2, blah, blah, blah. And we end with this and this. Okay? So this is your intro. Yeah? Then your theoretical framework. In essence, that's the theoretical framework that you originally put in your research proposal, but turned into 12 pages, where you really go deep into the theory, and possibly with a small pilot piece of research to see whether or not your theory has any basis. That doesn't have to happen, but if you want to publish, there aren't very many journals that accept pure theoretical articles, so it's always smart to do a small pilot so that you have some empirical data so that you can submit it to a journal. Tips of the trade. Okay? But that's your framework. But that's just an expansion of your original theoretical framework with new things that you've come across in the last 4 years and new views that you've gotten by doing your research. But that's your theoretical framework. Then between 2 and 3, it should be 2 and 4, sorry, further studies. Published, accepted, submitted, article. So, chapter 2 is article 1, chapter 3 is article 2, chapter 4 is article 3, chapter 5 is article 4. That's it. Then you have a concluding chapter, chapter 6. That's more than a summary, because you've done 3 or 4 empirical studies. Or, an empirical, I mean, qualitative, quantitative, it doesn't matter. You've done 3 or 4 studies. And each of those studies was to answer a specific problem or question. And this chapter is at a higher level of aggregation. If we bring, it usually begins with our original research question was this and this, and it had a number of sub-questions. Sub-question 1 was answered in chapter this and this, and then you have 1.5 pages in which you give the results of your first study. Same for the second and the third. But then I want you to bring it to a higher level of aggregation. We bring this, all of this together. What does this mean? And how should we proceed further? So it's not just a summary in terms of chapter 1 was this, chapter 2 was this, chapter 3, chapter 4, and now we're done, and suggestions for further research. I want you to bring it to a higher level of abstraction, generality, aggregation. It's kind of like what Osherveld would call an advanced organizer, but then at the end. Higher level of generality, higher level of aggregation, higher level of abstraction. Show me that you're not just someone who can carry out 4 pieces of research, but someone who can think academically at a theoretical level. It's that simple. And then a summary in English and Dutch, and any other language you want. So if someone here was to get their PhD at my university, I think the most normal thing would be to have a summary in English, Dutch, and Spanish, and Catalan. So you'd have 4 summaries. So you change your English summary, your English last chapter, into 3 other languages, so that Catalan can read what it is, that the Spaniards can read it, and that the Dutch can read it. What we have for our students is a research school that is to the Royal Dutch Academy of Sciences accepted research school, in which we give master level courses, as I was talking, structural equation modeling, and in which we create a community for our PhD candidates. So we have an introductory course, but that's 5 days, 1 day and then 2 times 2 days centrally in the Netherlands, so that the students, the candidates, have to stay in Utrecht, have to go out to dinner with each other, have to learn to know each other. And that's the things you talk about, all of the things academia. What does it mean to publish? What do you do when you get your first rejection letter? What does a thesis look like? How do you evaluate? How do you deal with your PhD supervisor? How do you relate to the problems? What are the different themes within our research school? All of those types of things. So you're creating your community. That's one course that's required, and the other course is a 1-week residential session somewhere in Europe, in which all of the themes are discussed. That's in your 2nd year or your 3rd year. So you can present your materials. We had one in Finland. We had one first in Rhodos, and we did it ourselves. We just wanted to go somewhere where it was warm, and we called it a summer school. Then we went to Finland in the winter and called it a winter school. And we did it together with the Finns, so that we had our own topics, but we also had 30 Finnish students, and we had specific topics from Finland, because Enno Lehtinen was the organizer, so we organized that with 3 or 4 topics that were important for them. Yeah? And so we had not 6 colloquia or workshops, but we had 10. And you had to go to at least 2 of the workshops. 5 were the first day and a half, 5 were the last day and a half, and the middle day was a day that we really got to know each other. And what did we do? Monday evening, some people did what they wanted, but we were primarily in kind of like a cloister, a small place together. Day 2, we went sledding and took a sauna together and jumped into an ice bath, and that was a lake that was opened up. Wednesday was the free day, and people went skiing and did all types of things after the morning session. Thursday was again a day together with an evening together, and Friday was a morning together, and in the afternoon we left. So it's really community building. And who came to that Finnish section? Some Germans, a lot of Dutch, some Finns, some Belgians, and we have to finish, right? Yes. Yeah, okay. The next one, hopefully, then we went to Regensburg in Germany, and the next one is hopefully here in Spain. This is the last slide, by the way. There they get education and training, they participate in the community, and what's most important, other, is integrity. No plagiarism, dealing with your respondents properly, and those types of things. Becoming an academic. Are there any other final questions before we leave that are burning that people want answered?
I'm wondering if you, after you get your master's degree, and you would start working for a company, would a company, how much would they pay you more in a way if you have a PhD?
That depends upon the company.
Okay.
It's completely
The
different.
PhD is the highest rank you can
Academic rank.
get.
The company, one, has to feel that by getting your PhD you're worth more, or they're grooming you for a certain function where they think you have a higher housing, the people see you status if you get your PhD. Some companies won't pay for it because often the head of the department has only a master's, only, that's the professor saying it, and that person might feel intimidated if there are PhDs there, and they won't want it because they feel that won't, or they might not want it because they feel if they give you your PhD, you'll go somewhere else. And they're investing in your PhD, and they invest in it, and someone else reaps the profit of it. So that depends upon the corporate policy. Any university that I know of in the Netherlands will normally do almost anything possible because they feel if there's room to do it, they profit by having you be an academic, but commercial industry is different. Other questions? Okay. Thank you for coming, and if you need any information, it's, paul.kirschner@ou.nl. Simpler it can't be. And I can make it simpler. PKIPKI@ou.nl, and I don't use that, but it gets to me if you use that.
Thank you.
Okay? And you can find me on Facebook, and you can find me on LinkedIn.